The LEAD Foundations course is built upon the foundation of principles. Principles are not tools. Principles are ideas, concepts, cognitive constructs. People use tools. Principles use people. This is why ideas or principles must be internalized at the motive level. Knowing a principle, even memorizing a principle, is not internalizing. In fact, memorization can stifle internalization. Not only that, those who rely on memory always live in fear, the fear of forgetting. Internalization is a process that requires construction of corollaries. Constructing a corollary is also a process. A corollary is a cognitive or thought-generated construct. Basically, a corollary is how we think about, talk about, or write about a principle. It's important to remember, we do not internalize the principle itself. We internalize the corollaries we construct that relate to the principle. Now, why do we use the word corollary? What is the origin of the word corollary? What is the definition of corollary? Technically speaking, a corollary is defined as a proposition we infer from a proven statement or theory. Consider this example from geometry. There's a proven theorem that states the angles opposite two congruent sides of a triangle are also congruent, like an isosceles triangle. A corollary to that statement is an equilateral triangle, that is, a triangle equal or having congruent sides, is also equiangular. In other words, it has equal congruent angles. In science and math, corollaries come from a deeper understanding of proven theory or concepts. In social science, just like in LEAD, we begin with a proven principle and come to a deeper understanding of the principle through reflection and deductive reasoning. Now, here is the big secret and small wonder. Just like in science, having an inquisitive mind is essential. The process of constructing a corollary begins by asking questions. When you ask yourself a question, your brain gives you an answer. It may not be the right answer or the best answer, but that doesn't matter. What matters is that you initiate an internal dialogue. You begin to have a conversation with yourself. When you engage with the perception regions of the brain and gain a deeper understanding, a deeper awareness, a more intuitive understanding, that creates insights. In LEAD, insights are corollaries. And insights can be generated consciously or subconsciously. Let's look at an example with IPO. The first step is learning the IPO principle. It consists of three variables that have a dynamic and sequential cause and effect relationship. The next step is to ask questions. Why are there three variables? Why are they in that order? Why do we put so much emphasis on the O? What is the true value or nature of the O? Why do we start with the O and then proceed to the I? How do we know what constitutes the I's? And why must we measure the I's and the P's? As you relax, reflect, and continue the internal inquiry, you may come to realize that IPO is actually an analog to the management function. That IPO thinking mirrors the management functions of planning, organizing, coordinating, and controlling or measuring. All of the connections your brain makes, all of your ideas, all of your insights are possible corollaries. And corollaries build on each other. This means your corollaries can become more detailed and more comprehensive. Once in a while, you may even experience a true insight, sometimes called an aha moment. But wait, there's one caveat or caution. Coming up with an example of a principle is not a corollary. An example or an analogy is not the same as a corollary. This does not mean that examples are evil, just that an example and a corollary are not the same thing. And their thinking processes are not the same. An example or analogy is something that resembles something else or is like something else. An example is used as a basis of comparison to compare less familiar with more familiar things. In other words, an example or analogy can help simplify a concept. Examples already exist in our heads. That's why we use them. We simply access them in our memory bank. An example exists because a corollary must be brought into existence. A corollary does not compare, it comprehends. A corollary is not an example, it's an elaboration. A corollary, as Charles Sanders Peirce said, is the product of an experiment of the imagination. Constructing a corollary is a knowledge generation process. No number of examples can extend our knowledge. For instance, all the examples in the world for gravity will not help us understand the nature of gravity. What comes up must come down. An apple falling from a tree to the ground. Throwing a ball up in the air and catching it when it comes down. Jumping up and jumping back down on a trampoline. The moon orbiting the Earth and the Earth orbiting the sun. None of these examples tell us anything about the force of gravity or can help us understand centrifugal force or Newton's laws of gravitational force. The same goes for the displacement of water. We can come up with all kinds of examples for this effect, but none would help us come to understand Archimedes' principle that displacement is a function of volume, not weight. Finally, the cognitive process associated with thinking about an example and the cognitive process associated with creating a corollary can connect, but they are two different and distinct processes. And an example does not directly lead to a corollary. Examples or analogies and corollaries are not on a single continuum. They are two separate thinking processes altogether. Ever since you were a young child, you've been internalizing ideas. It was simple, but it mostly occurred subconsciously. Now you are trying to internalize consciously, but it's still simple. Surrender to the simplicity.